A pair of clawed hands erupted from the floor and gripped my throat, slamming my head against the stone altar. The impact cracked my vision into shards of gray and black. I couldn't breathe, but more than that, I couldn't scream. The air in my lungs was replaced by a thick, foul scent of rotting meat and old copper. Behind me, I heard Miko and Gab hitting the ground, their cries cut short by the heavy thud of something slamming into them. Then silence fell. It wasn't just a lack of noise. It was a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed against my eardrums. I didn't know then that this was the end of our project. I didn't know that the tape recorder in Miko's pocket would be the only thing left to prove we were ever there. 3 hours earlier, we were laughing in a van parked near the outskirts of San Fernando, Pampanga. We were senior students at Bulacan State University, and our capstone project was supposed to be something simple, documenting local folklore through parapsychological experimentation. Mako was the risk-taker of our group. He loved the thrill of the unknown, often spending his weekends searching for abandoned sites in the provinces. Gab was the skeptic, the one who insisted on using scientific methodology, measuring electromagnetic fields and recording audio levels to prove whether hauntings were real or just environmental anomalies. I was the middle ground, the one who kept us focused on the research and made sure we didn't get arrested for trespassing. The site was an old mausoleum, part of a sprawling family estate that had been abandoned since the late 1940s. The local stories spoke of a priest who had lost his mind trying to seal something beneath the chapel foundations. People called it the Vault of the Silent. We arrived at dusk. The grass around the mausoleum was waist-high and dry, crunching under our boots like broken glass. The structure itself was made of heavy gray stone, covered in patches of pale moss that looked like moldy fur. "This is it," Miko whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the open space. He held a high-powered flashlight that cut through the deepening gloom. "The records say this site hasn't been entered by anyone but the local tilling families since before the war." Gab checked his equipment. "Just make sure you keep your voices down. I need to capture the ambient audio clearly. If we get any noise from outside, it will ruin the baseline." We entered the mausoleum through a heavy iron gate that groaned on its hinges. Inside, the air was cooler and still. It didn't move like the wind outside. It felt stagnant, as if it hadn't circulated in decades. We set up our gear in the center of the chamber, where several large stone sarcophagi were arranged in a semicircle. The spirit of the glass was our primary experiment for the night. It wasn't just about moving a piece of glass. It was about seeing if an entity would respond to specific questions within the confined space of a burial site. I held the glass. It was heavy and thick, with a gold-trimmed rim that felt cold against my palm. We sat in a circle on the dusty floor, our legs crossed. "Standard rules," I reminded them, my voice shaking just enough for Gab to notice. "No questions about death, no games with real people, and we do not hold hands until we are ready to say the opening phrase." Miko nodded, his face illuminated by the glow of a small lantern we placed in the center. "Let's start with some basic identifiers. Ask it who is here." I placed my hands on the glass. Miko put his on the left side and Gab put his on the right. We all gripped the rim together. The texture was rough and I could feel the slight tremors in Gab's hand. "Spirit, if you are present, show us a sign," I said. The room went silent. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. I thought we were wasting time, but then the glass gave a tiny, almost imperceptible jerk to the left. It was so small that only we could have felt it through our hands. "It moved," Miko whispered. "Probably just a vibration from the ground," Gab muttered, though he sounded uncertain. I took a breath and asked the next question. "What is your name?" The glass didn't move slowly like I expected. It slammed to the left, then right, striking my knuckles with enough force to bruise them. It moved in short, violent bursts. It didn't point toward a letter on the board yet. It simply danced in place as if something was trying to break free from our grip. Then it began to move across the letters. It moved left, then right, spelling out VADE. "Vade," I whispered. "That's Latin," Gab said, his voice dropping an octave. "It means go or withdraw. Like they'd retro, it's a phrase used to tell something evil to back away." The air in the room suddenly felt thicker. The smell of old dust was replaced by that sharp, metallic tang I would later recognize as the scent of decay. "Who is here?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The glass moved again. It didn't move toward a single word this time. It moved in a jagged circle, then snapped to the left. "Exorcizamus. Exorcisamus," I read aloud. "It means we exorcise you. It's part of an exorcism prayer." Miko's grip on my hand tightened. Why would it use that word? We didn't ask about religion. The lantern in the center flickered. The flame turned a strange, sickly shade of green for a heartbeat before returning to yellow. "Maybe it's reacting to our intent," Gab said, his voice trembling now. He wasn't trying to be a skeptic anymore. He was just scared. "It knows we're looking for something." I tried to ignore the sweat trickling down my neck. I wanted to stop, to pack up the equipment and leave this place behind, but the curiosity of the project and the sheer weight of the silence around us held me in place. "Are you a spirit?" I asked. The glass didn't move to a word. Instead, it began to spin rapidly in a circle. It spun so fast that the friction seemed to create a faint humming sound. Then it stopped. It pointed directly at the word, "Not." "Not what?" Miko asked. "Give us more." The glass moved with such force that it nearly flew out of our hands. It slammed into the letters one by one, as if being pushed by an invisible hand with immense strength. "HUMN." I felt a sudden drop in temperature. It wasn't just a draft. It was as if all the heat had been sucked out of the air instantly. My breath came out in a white puff of mist. "It's saying not human," I whispered. The sound of grinding stone started deep beneath us. It wasn't an earthquake. It was rhythmic, like something heavy was being dragged across the floor just outside our circle. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. "Someone is out there," Miko hissed, his eyes wide. "It's not someone," Gab whispered back. He was looking at his sensors. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. They're spiking in a pattern I've never seen." I looked at the glass again. It wasn't moving according to our grip anymore. It felt like it was being jerked by something outside of us. It began to move across the board again, but this time it wasn't spelling words clearly. It was jumping around, as if the entity behind it was frustrated or in a hurry. "FERA. Ferris," I asked. "That means wild beast." The scraping sound stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no wind, nothing. Then a voice drifted from the corner of the room. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded like stones grinding against each other in a deep well. "Vade. Retro." It wasn't just one person speaking. It sounded like a dozen voices layered over each other, all distorted and hollow. The lantern flared bright white for a second, illuminating the back of the mausoleum. For that split second, I saw it. A shape tall, hunched, and draped in what looked like rotting gray rags was standing near the far wall. It had horns that curved backward like those of an old ram, but they were jagged and broken at the tips. The light died. "Did you see that?" Miko gasped. He was shaking so hard I could feel it through my fingers. "I saw something," Gab whispered. "It moved toward us." We didn't speak for a long time. We stayed gripped to the glass, our hands trembling. We were terrified, but we were paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the situation. The glass began to move again. It didn't wait for me to ask a question. It moved with violent speed across the letters. "DOMINELIBERANOS. "Lord, deliver us," I whispered, my voice cracking. We had all subconsciously joined in the prayer. It was a desperate reflex of the soul. The moment the words were spoken, the ground beneath us buckled. A crack split the floor between Miko and me. The air filled with a thick dust that made it hard to see. From the crack, a black, oily substance began to seep out, smelling of ancient rot and sulfur. It wasn't liquid. It moved like a living thing, crawling toward our legs. "Run," Miko breathed. The word was barely out of his mouth when the shadow from the back of the room lunged forward. I didn't run. It moved with a terrifying, jerky motion, like a film skipping frames. It slammed into Gab first. He was thrown against the stone wall with such force that he lost consciousness instantly. His equipment scattered across the floor. The tripod snapped like a twig, and his radio began to emit a high-pitched, continuous whine. I felt a hand grab my shoulder. It wasn't a hand of flesh and bone. It felt like cold, wet leather. "Help!" I screamed. The thing was looming over me now. I could see the horns clearly. They were just bone. They were covered in a dark, mossy growth that looked like dried blood. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but pits of glowing yellow light that burned behind the orbital bones. The glass flew out of our hands and shattered against the stone floor. The shards flew into my face, cutting my cheek. I scrambled backward, kicking out with my legs. My heel caught on a heavy stone slab, sending it tilting. It fell against a support beam, causing a cloud of dust to explode into the air. Miko was struggling against something in the corner. He was screaming, a raw, guttural sound that didn't sound human. I could see him fighting against a mass of dark shapes that were pulling him toward the fissure in the floor. Miko! I yelled. I grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the ground and swung it at the shadow. The light hit the creature's side, and it let out a hiss that shattered the remaining glass ornaments on the nearby altars. It recoiled, its form flickering like a dying candle. In that moment of hesitation, I saw Miko's hand reach out for me. I lunged toward him, grabbing his arm and pulling with every ounce of strength I had. We rolled across the floor, moving away from the crack in the earth. The shadow seemed to hesitate, its form becoming more translucent, as if it were struggling to maintain its grip on our reality. We didn't wait for it to decide. I grabbed my bag and a heavy lantern, and I dragged Miko toward the exit. We scrambled through the dust, our hands scraping against the rough stone of the walls. Every time we moved, the floor seemed to groan, as if the building itself was reacting to our presence. We reached the main archway. The metal gate was jammed, swollen by years of rust and moisture. "Push!" I screamed at Miko. He threw his shoulder against the bars. On the third try, the hinges gave way with a groan that sounded like a dying animal's cry. We tumbled out onto the grass, falling into the dirt outside the perimeter. We didn't stop. We ran. We didn't look back at the mausoleum. We didn't look at the trees that seemed to lean in toward us as we passed. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like they were made of lead. It wasn't until we reached the main road, nearly a kilometer away, that we stopped to breathe. The moon was high now, casting a cold, white light over the fields. Miko sat in the dirt, coughing, his shirt torn where the creature had grabbed him. Gab lay nearby, groaning as he woke up. He touched the back of his head where a bruise was already forming the size of a dinner plate. Did you see it?" Gab whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their heavy breathing. I couldn't speak. I could only look at my hands. They were still shaking. My cheek was bleeding where the glass had shattered. "It wasn't a ghost," I said finally, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "A ghost is just a memory. That thing was something else." We sat there for a long time, the silence of the countryside wrapping around us like a shroud. The only sound was the distant hum of a single car on the highway and the frantic thumping of our hearts. The next day, we never spoke of the project in the same way again. We turned in the recordings to the university, but we edited out the last 20 minutes. On the tape, those final moments were nothing but a wall of static and a sound like grinding teeth that no one was supposed to hear. I still have the scar on my cheek from the glass. Sometimes, when the room is very quiet and the air feels heavy with the scent of old earth, I can still hear that hiss in the back of my mind. If you ever find yourself near those fields in San Fernando, stay away from the stone walls. Some things are buried for a reason, and some voices were never meant to be answered by human tongues. You think it's still waiting there in the dark, listening for the next set of hands to touch the glass.